Okay, last but not least, cost share breakdown. So I've gone with a pretty straightforward one. I stuck with having $1 million overall project cost this time instead of $1 million award up here to keep the numbers pretty easy to manage. But so you have the $900,000 federal award, and you're doing 10% cost share. So the university contribution down here is $100,000. Um, so cost share for those that don't know uh, is rarely required anymore. It used to be something much more common. The NSF did away with it years ago. Um, More often than not now, when cost share exists is when it's very applied research, and especially when you're sort of going towards, the project is going towards developing a prototype, starting to err towards the side of commercialization, getting towards, technology readiness level 3 or 4 or something. Um, and at that point, funding agencies will often mandate, 10% cost share is what I've seen generally. It might go higher. But, it makes sense if you're going towards commercialization that, especially if you're sort of opening up the call beyond universities and to like commercial entities, you would want people to put their money where their mouth is, and ante up a little bit. So that's sort of the basic premise. Universities usually end up providing cost share in the form of faculty salary, um, uh, which they already have the money for, obviously. So what it reflects is that you're by giving the faculty by using the faculty salary to support research cost share, you're saying that you're committing the faculty member to spend part of their time doing research, which obviously is built into an academic position to an extent. If the amount of cost share is rather significant to the faculty member's salary, is a significant portion of the faculty member's salary, then that might bring up issues if the university has to do some sort of agreement to say that the professor will reduce the teaching load so that they have the time to do the research based on what the project is paying for or what they're paying for towards the project, right? Okay, so the reason this came up at all was just because a new cost share policy was implemented in the Chemie department. It wasn't proposed, it wasn't discussed, it wasn't written, it wasn't provided in advance of being used. It was simply brought up the day the grant was due, and it was like, well, come up with it or I won't approve it kind of thing. So beyond the basic, essentially, extortion part, let's just get down to sort of the nitty-gritty details of the difference between the current and old policy, and then I'll sort of talk about the impact that has to faculty, which, quite frankly, it's a policy that's discriminatory against applied researchers. Bottom line, but I'll show you. Okay, so the sort of policy that's been in effect for years, decades, what have you, has always been that okay, if you have $100,000 in research, it breaks down 2-1-1 between central administration, the college that you're in. I have COE for College of Engineering, and then the department. In the newly implemented policy, that departmental cost share was being split between the department and the faculty member. So you have a 4-2-1-1 split now. So I wanted to put this in relation to the last video on research incentive funds. So, faculty get a small portion of their, or an amount equivalent to, 1 to 2.5% of the federal award or the sponsored research award back in the form of research incentive funds, RIF funds. But if they're also required to pay cost share, how does that balance out? And that is what I sought to give some real numbers for down here. Okay, we'll just let me scroll. Hello. Well, okay. So, how it works, starting up at the top, this is talking about the faculty member. So we're breaking it down between the historic policy and of the faculty not providing any cost share, and the new policy of the faculty member picking up half of the department's cost share. And then I have this between, since I'm doing basically putting this in terms of, the cost share that faculty have to pay out and the refunds that they receive, I'm accounting for both distributions of refunds, since it can, at the department's discretion, it's either given back in the, in the faculty's favor or the department's favor in a 1-to-2 ratio. So here you either have the $11,000 or the $22,000 amount for faculty research, which is, just the same as it would have been in the research incentive funds video, because there is no cost share. And then in this new policy, what you have is you have those same numbers echoed again here, but then they have to pay that the $12,500 from up here, right? So, and then so that means that depending on how generous the department's distribution of RIF funds is, the faculty will get is now reduced down from the 1.23% down to 1.07% at the absolute maximum, and they could in fact lose money by pursuing research awards, which is just mind-boggling that someone would institute that kind of policy, let alone institute the policy without ever bringing up that a new policy was being formed or proposing a new policy or what have you. Shenanigans. So I did also want to put this in the context of, the department. So, are they just that cash-strapped? Let's have some empathy for the department, right? So I did the same thing with the department. Okay, so they get RIF, same thing as the faculty, but it's just reversed, right? Because it's either the 1-to-2 or 2-to-1 ratio. And then we have the cost share. So in the historic policy, it's always been they take the whole thing, no faculty helping pick up the tab, so they have the full $25,000. But then recall from the F&A tab, or the F&A video, the facilities and administrative costs, that departments receive a pretty hefty amount of money based on research expenditures. Sorry, I do have that actually below, because obviously I didn't want to confuse these spreadsheets around too much and have everything cross-linked and crazy. So, right. So I do have the amount that the department gets, the department administration gets, and the amount the department administrative allowance gets. Keep in mind that this does include the full amount, both from the federal award as well as that extra match for research administration costs that is subsidized by undergraduate tuition. But since, undergraduates are paying that money, so the department does receive it. So I thought it makes sense to include it up here. If you don't feel that way, you're welcome to use the lower amounts, but those are the actual dollar amounts. So when you sum all of that together, in the historic policy that has been used, the department is still walking away with between $85,000 and $74,000, which is a hell of a lot more than the faculty member that's conducting the research. Meanwhile, under the new policy, where the faculty pick up that other $12,500, you obviously see that $12,500 increase here to $98,000 and $87,000. But obviously, it's just sort of crazy to wrap your mind around the idea that a department, that's fighting over, it's $12,000, but when you're going to receive $85,000, it doesn't really make sense to be fighting for the $12,000 when you know that that $12,000 is actually going to cost a faculty member money. And the other thing too is like, where is the faculty member supposed to come up with that money, right? Like, okay, if you have an endowment, you can pull from your endowment, but not everyone has an endowment. You could have a gift from someone, but what does that mean? Like, now faculty, on top of everything else that they have to do, need to have like their own personal capital giving campaign so that they can pursue funded research, applied research funding. And then thirdly is, RIF funds from previous grants, which, as I articulated in the RIF video, faculty do need those funds for graduate students for equipment to remain competitive in their research. So it's really quite insane to implement such a crazy policy. I also wanted to revisit sort of the graduate student thing I had in the RIF video. I had just noted, how much money would a faculty member have to acquire in order to how much research funding would a faculty member have to acquire in order to pay for a graduate student for 1 year. So at the cost of $56,000 to the unrestricted funds with no overhead. In the historic policy, you see those same numbers from before of $2.6 million and $5 million. And then these are actually slightly increased because I was accounting for the cost share in there too. And then with the new policy, when the faculty member is obviously losing money, it's impossible to accrue funds to RIF that way. And alternatively, they would have to have $5.9 million worth of research before they could pick up the tab for a graduate student for 1 year. So the rest of this is redundant. It's to help the calculations up above. But just sort of as a recap, this is generally not affecting a lot of researchers, but those it really has the potential to impact is applied research. And so, this does involve everyone because it's the stuff that, makes it out into the real world, and it's obviously sort of the transition point of, you take the basic fundamental science research and you start to collaborate with applied researchers, and then it hits the real world, and that's how research has an impact on society, which is kind of its responsibility. That's sort of like, what academia's responsibility ultimately is to give back to society for the privilege of, having academia as a societal thing that we have. Anyway, so those are my 2 cents. This policy, quote unquote, is totally bonkers. It's discriminatory against applied researchers, and everyone that cares about research should care about this.